Alrighty, gonna kick it off now. Welcome back, everyone. It's so good to be back here for another week of Resilience Growing. I'm Tobias. I think we've still got a few people coming in. As always, got a few latecomers. That's good. A nice small intimate group tonight as well, which is cool as to see. Can we? How does everyone feel about turning the camera on so we can say hello to each other? Give each other a wave. How's everyone going this week? Hey, Cecile. Big thumbs up. Awesome. Cool as. Well, we've got a really good session for you today. I'm very excited. We've got a very special guest who you're going to find out more about in a second. But yeah, I'm just going to start off as always with a acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm streaming from today. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that I'm streaming from land that was never ceded. Cool. 100%. So before we jump into it, does anyone have any wins or any successes or any cool stories from the week that they want to share about their kits? How's everyone been going with it? Does anyone want to share anything? No? Okay, I assume everyone's nailing it then. Everyone's winning big time. That's great. We've had a pretty good week here at Farmall. Always big things happening in the background. We're really excited to sort of plug you all into what's going to go on in the next few weeks as well with the rest of the program. Yeah, we don't have too much to share today, so we're pretty much just going to jump straight into the talk. So today we have our very first international guest speaker, Sarah Heeringa, all the way from Auckland, New Zealand. Sarah is a upcycling expert. She's written 2 books on the subject of taking old things and making them new again, or taking waste and repurposing them into beautiful new things. As well as being an author, she's an editor and writer and journalist, and currently works for Oxfam New Zealand as their media and communications manager. And as some of you may have figured out, she is also my mum. So very excited to have her here tonight, and you've got to treat her all really nicely, ask her lots of questions, and yeah, I'm the most excited to hear. So cool. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah. Just unmute you. Oh, there we go.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here tonight to talk with you all. I've got a little presentation, so I'm just going to figure out how to share that. Toby, can you remind me how I share the screen again?
It's the share screen button right down the bottom in the green, in the center.
That one. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So, just to kick it off, upcycling. This is me in my kitchen, which is made using a number of upcycled things. And just a little bit about me, as Toby mentioned, Tobias mentioned, I'm the former editor of Good Magazine. I'm now at Oxfam New Zealand, and I'm a mother of 4, and I enjoy fixing up old things to use in my house and garden. And we've lived in a succession of old houses, and we've always had to make do, fix things up, renovate, always on a tight budget. And so from that time of being a mum at home with little kids and not very much money to do things with, that's how I began to learn how to do upcycling, making the most of what I had around me. And as Tobias mentioned, I've published a couple of books, and that's them there, reclaim that, and upcycling with style. Now, upcycling, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, is basically about taking broken or unwanted objects and then giving them a new life, doing a few things to them, pulling them apart, fixing parts, turning them into an item of use or beauty. And once you get started with it, you kind of see possibilities everywhere. Upcycling can be in the garden as well. And it can just start with what we have around us. This was me a few years ago. I discovered there were a whole lot of old chimney bricks. Half of them were buried, some of them were broken. I started digging them out. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with them, but I turned them into a garden. And then later on, the garden looked like that, with all sorts of crazy herbs and beans. See the beans there? Great crop of beans. Artichokes, beautiful flowers on the artichokes. So that was kind of satisfying. And then a bit later, I made a thing called cloche. Well, a cloche can be all sorts of things. It can be like a bell, or it can be what I've made there, which is like a mini greenhouse to give some of the plants a bit of extra shelter. It's like a little mini greenhouse that you can move around. And I made it using some scraps of old wood that we had lying around and an old window, which I hinged onto the top. And then I painted it to make it look more beautiful. And because I knew I wasn't planting anything directly onto the painted area, it was all fine. So I used that for growing little seedlings, and in the wintertime growing some vegetables, some herbs, some salad greens that won't cope with being outside in the cold. That was a photo I took yesterday. I've moved it to another place in the garden, and I've lined the bottom with some sort of rubber matting that we had that was, I don't know where that came from, and some gubba tubs that had cracked. I cut the gubba tubs down to make shallow planters, which worked really well. And I hold it up with that piece of wood as an old broom handle, which I've painted. So you get the idea. It's about using just the things you have around in a different way. Another upcycling project I did in the garden was making this vertical garden using a pallet. And one thing I should add about that is that before you do anything with pallets where you've got the plants directly against the pallets, you want to check the pallet first for international pallet stamps. And you can look online and see what the stamp means, and find out whether that is safe to use, or it's a toxic, one that's been used for toxic transportation or not suitable. So that's a little handy tip. Another thing we did with the pallet was we made a swing bed, and it was a fabulous swing bed. And you can see there is the young Mexican woman who was living with us enjoying the swing bed. But then we decided that actually it was a little bit unpractical. It used to swing quite a bit, being a swing bed. It was actually more enjoyable having it as a mobile garden day bed. Actually, that worked really well. We've still got it, and I've had some lovely snoozes in the sun, because the great thing about that is you could move it around to be wherever the sun is, or out of the sun if you want. And that's Gary the cat there having a nice little time on the daybed. So yeah, there's loads of great reasons to upcycle. Saves you money, makes better uses of resources. It's an easy way to switch out the stuff that you have to give it a new look. But I think one of the very best things about upcycling is that because you're starting with things that are old and unwanted, or maybe even broken, you can actually give yourself permission to experiment, to be creative, to make mistakes, and to learn new things. And the great thing about upcycling is you're not starting with a blank canvas. You haven't spent a whole lot of money to buy all these fancy art materials or craft supplies that then you're almost too scared to use in case you make a mistake. You're just starting with a piece of junk So you can mix it up. You can try different things, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. Or you can change it from one thing to another. So a swing bed becomes a mobile bed. And which leads me to my latest upcycling garden project, which I think, not aware of it at the time, but looking back, I can see that there was a progression of thought there. So this was originally a rack for bread, and it's a supermarket rack trolley thing, like you might find in a dairy. And I painted it black, and I had the thought that there was a problem with my first garden. It was fixed in place. If the cold wind blew, I couldn't protect the plants. I could build a cloche, but I couldn't protect the plants from the cold wind. The pellet garden was great, but it was a little bit too slim, and the plants dried out in the summer. So I wanted something flat, but I really liked the idea of being able to move the garden around so I could maximize the sun, or take them out of the wind if it was too windy. So I lined the trays with some old tent, and it was some canvas actually from a tent that died during a family camping holiday. Tobias can tell you more about that, but so I cut the canvas up. I lined the bottom. I then put some pumice for drainage and some sheep pellets for extra nutrition. And as an experiment, I put some of this, which is a wool byproduct. And if you buy, like, I don't know if you have them in Australia, My Food Bag, you probably got something similar. You know, when you get the food delivered to your house, and as meals, they use this wool as an insulation around the chilled food, and it's totally reusable. So I put some of that in the bottom, and then I filled it with potting mix, and I put some plants in, and there we have my mobile veggie garden. And it's just going a treat. The cos lettuce at the top is really ripping away. The stuff at the bottom, not so much. It's not getting quite so much light, but that's fine, because we don't want everything to be ready at the same time. And then you'll notice there are a couple of bent sticks at the top, and that was because my piece de resistance, which was got some plastic bags from the bottom of a banana box, and I sewed them together. And there's a close-up of my lovely vegetables. I made a cover for it, which goes over the top. So I just sewed that up on the sewing machine, and I hold it in place using some bull clips. And that means that when it's raining or it's really cold, like now it's starting to get a bit colder in Auckland, I can give my plants the extra protection that they want, as well as moving them around to maximize the sun. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. I find it incredibly satisfying to grow vegetables, and I haven't always been successful. I've had lots of trial and error, and I think this mobile veggie garden is going to be really, really helpful. And I guess one thing that I've been reflecting on with putting this presentation together is how some of the things that we've learned through this crazy time with the pandemic. We've learned that a few home truths. I think we've learned how interconnected we all are. We've learned how we have to all work together to deal with really challenging problems. We have learned, and for some of us, this is quite a scary thought, we've learned that we're really dependent on other people for our food. And for many of us, that's a new and scary thought, because we're not used to that idea of food scarcity or food insecurity. So yeah, I think when I can go out into the garden and get something to eat, I think, oh wow, at least we're not gonna, well, we might be able to live on parsley for a while, if worst comes to worst. These are some of the lockdown veggies that I took a photo of, really bad photo, but I just was feeling so chuffed. That was my first radish, because I was panic buying just before we went into lockdown, because but we went into a bit of a stricter lockdown than you guys did, and so a couple of days, the days before, I went and bought up some of the last plants at the plant shop, and I grew those radishes, and the herbs were in the garden as well. So those were some lockdown veggies, and then we also harvested this pumpkin in the middle of lockdown. This is a picture that I, through my work with Oxfam, I was fortunate enough to go to PNG at the end of last year. And this is a photo that we took at one of the schools that we visited. The kids, they all have gardens at the schools, and the kids learn to tend the gardens at school as they do at home. Because in places like PNG, the ability to grow your own food is can be the difference between eating and not eating. And it's quite sobering to realise that, and to talk to the students who were saying in the dry season, when there's no rain, we only have this really sort of dry old vegetable, like a kind of tuber, and that's all they have to eat. This is me in Papa New Guinea with our driver. This is me talking to some women at a really amazing woman at a clinic, which is up in the Eastern Highlands, way up in the hills, and incredibly dedicated woman looking after the women in their community who walk for miles to come to the clinic. But amazingly, that clinic does not have water. Like, they have no water, no running water. So if a woman is going to give birth, someone has to go with a bucket, make a trek to the river to get a bucket of water so that they can sterilize things, so that she can have a wash or a drink after she's given birth. It blows your mind. This is some of the people from the clinic. And some of the kids at the school, one of the schools we visited. I was really lucky to talk to these girls about some of their dreams for the future. So Papua New Guinea, it has some really dark and difficult problems. Rapid urbanisation, high crime, unemployment, domestic violence, which is illegal but rarely prosecuted. 2 out of 3 women in Papua New Guinea experience abuse at the hands of an intimate partner at least once in their lives. So terrible domestic abuse statistics. Many people in rural Papua New Guinea don't have access to clean water. They walk for hours every day to collect dirty water that makes them sick. And as I said before, many schools and health clinics don't have access to water. And when there's a drought, there's no water for families to grow their crops. This woman, Rena, said that when there's no rain, she walks to the river and the water is so dirty that it makes everyone sick. And I said, what do you mean by sick? What sort of sickness? And she said, typhoid. We all get typhoid. Just crazy. And I met some amazing people too, like Mr. Kopa, who's determined to make his school as good as he can and help the girls go to school just like the boys. It's all about taps. It's all about water, access to water, something that we take for granted often, and the ability to wash your hands and to grow things. You can see the little garden running along the front of the classroom there. So I just wanted to finish up by saying that Oxfam, so it's not all doom and gloom, there's some big problems, but we are working on a harvest project, working with local partners in PNG and Vanuatu and other places around the Pacific to help farmers improve their skills, develop more like drought-resistant crops or crops they can grow in the off-season, crops that don't require so much water, so they can send their kids to school, access healthcare and put food on the table. And we've also got this big 4-year flow program that's installing high quality, sustainable water supplies, taps and toilets into schools and health centres. 12 schools, 8 health centres, reaching an estimated 30,000 people. So that's pretty cool. And in case you guys don't know, there's an Oxfam in your neighbourhood. It's in 132 Leicester Street, Carlton. And I've been there. Super cool people. And so yeah, if you're feeling like, if you're feeling inspired about the veggies that you're growing, if you're feeling if you're having a renewed appreciation of food scarcity, food poverty, or food insecurity, and spare a thought for these people in Papua New Guinea who are really doing it tough. And yeah, feel free to make a donation or rock up to your local Oxfam and do some volunteering, because it's be a really satisfying project to be involved with. Yeah, so that's me. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Sarah. That was such a good.
You're welcome.
And yeah, like it's great work. I'm really proud of what you do. Cool to see it. It's sort of interesting. Like we've talked about this in the past, like how these two concepts that you were talking about, they're not actually that. They're actually closer aligned and linked than you might think at first. Like upcycling, repurposing old stuff, and food insecurity in countries like Papua New Guinea. One of the reasons why like food security or a lot of the issues that countries like Papua New Guinea are facing are related to climate, obviously, and obviously one of the biggest causes, or one of the leading sort of causes of climate issues is consumption, right? So do you want to can you help us unpack that connection in some way, and how upcycling can sort of perhaps play a role in addressing some of these issues?
Sure. So yeah, there's basically there's wealthy countries like New Zealand and Australia, and other countries in Europe and America, who we just consume way more resources than is smart, but way more resources than we need to live a good quality life. And we generate a lot of carbon emissions in the process, and a lot of waste. And we burn up a lot of energy. And that, as we all know, has caused massive problems, which is now translating into climate destruction across the world. And the tragedy, the great injustice of the climate change, climate destruction phenomenon is that the countries that are contributing the most to the problem are the ones that are the least affected. And the people in the countries that have done the least to contribute to it, the low-lying countries like Bangladesh and the island nations, are the ones that are feeling the most impact. So when they're like there was a storm just recently, Cyclone Harold, that ripped through a few of the countries, Vanuatu and parts of Fiji and elsewhere, and you know that wipes out crops, it destroys infrastructure, their houses are blown down or flooded. It just makes a really challenging situation so much worse. So that's really not fair. And what we can do about that is try and be smarter with the way that we use our resources, so that we generate less waste, so that we need less stuff to live the life that we want to live. And upcycling can help us do that. Like, you know, you can go to a big box store and you can buy something for probably quite cheap that's been made in some sweatshop somewhere, but the cost of it is not reflected in the price, because there's an environmental cost and a carbon cost that isn't recorded in the price of the $12 item that you've just bought from Kmart or whoever. Or you can have an upcycling model, and you can get a secondhand item and you can repurpose it to be that thing that you want, and you'll end up with something that's more original, more interesting, maybe even more attractive, something that suits your purposes, something that you've got a connection to, so you can when people come over and go, wow, what an amazing leather sofa you've got, and you can say, well, I actually got that from a junk shop and then I painted it, because you can paint leather, and things like that. And people are like, what, you can do that? You feel good, they feel impressed, everybody wins. So does that answer your problem? I mean, answer your question, Tobias?
It does answer my question. It does answer my question. Yeah, it kind of answers another question as well, which is sort of, you touched on it actually, like, what's the, like, like given how easy it is to just buy stuff that is often perhaps better quality than something that we can make ourselves, and we save heaps of time doing it, you know, what's the imperative to upcycle and to try and actually put in the effort to make something new or take something old and give it new life? But I think you kind of answered it, which is like, it plays a role in addressing some of these larger socio-economic climate consumption issues, but it also is more fulfilling, right? Like you have more of a personal connection to this thing that you've made and you look after it more.
Yeah, way more fulfilling. And because, you know, we don't all do things for altruistic motives all the time, you know, like that's part of it, but that's not, it's nice to get an immediate reward as well. So one of the great things about upcycling is that old things are often way better quality than new things. So if you get an old piece of wooden furniture from a junk shop or from Salvation Army or whatever kind of store, or you get from someone who's chucking it out and you fix it up, chances are you'll end up with something that's solid wood, that's really well constructed, that the legs are not going to go wobbly and fall off, that you can sand back and give it a great wood treatment, or you can paint it, or you can do different things to it. Whereas if you buy something new, chances are it's probably made from MDF. If you, I don't know if you've ever tried fixing something made from MDF, it's really, really tricky. I've tried it and it is, you know, it's really hard to get that once that perfect finish is scratched or damaged, it's really hard to fix it. So, and if the legs get wobbly, you can't re-drill the holes because it's just chipboard. So yeah, with upcycling, you can surround yourself with things that are well made, that are original, that you actually enjoy having in your life.
And often older things are actually made, they were like constructed with the intention of being repairable, you know, compared to now where a lot of things aren't necessarily. We have got a question for you around like, where is the best place to get that kind of good old stuff? Yeah, like, I mean, you mentioned a few things, but do you have any favorite spots that you like to get stuff to upcycle, or what's your method?
Well, we used to have an organic collections. I don't know if you have them in Melbourne, where people put stuff out on the side of the road.
Yeah, the equivalent here is called hard rubbish.
Right.
Yeah.
That half of our house is furnished through that, and it's amazing the things you get, like Italian chandeliers we got, and rugs, and rollerblades, all sorts of stuff. Lots of garden furniture. You can also get from those places. You can sometimes get stuff that you can use as a resource. Like, upcycling is not just about taking something and restoring it. It's also about seeing that thing for its component parts. So a really simple example of that is like a headboard. A headboard is a headboard, but it's also a really good quality piece of timber often, which can be cut up and used in other ways. So it could be a bench top, or it could be really nice cheese boards, or it could be a shelf, or whatever, you know, like seeing things as a resource rather than a waste. And once you start doing that, you see stuff everywhere. In fact, the challenge is not finding things. The challenge is not to take too many things home.
Not to become a hoarder.
Yeah. Because once people know that you like doing projects, people will offer you stuff. So that's another good way to get things. If you, I don't know if your local dump has a dump shop, but our one does. You can go and buy stuff from the dump shop. So you can, when you take things to the dump, you take some stuff to the dump shop and they'll give you a voucher, which counts against your rubbish, the amount that you have to pay for dumping your rubbish. You can also buy things from the dump shop. So you take stuff there, you bring stuff home. It's a great system.
And yeah, you kind of touched on it there a little bit about like the headspace and the mindset of like looking at waste, looking at objects not as waste but as a resource. And it's something we've kind of touched on we've been talking about it in the last couple of weeks about that mindset. But was there a moment for you where that kind of happened, where you was it like a gradual process over time, or was it like a distinct moment, or has it always just been for you like not viewing things as rubbish but instead seeing them as a resource?
I think it was a gradual process over time. And I think it probably started with being at home with a baby, which was you, and a toddler, and an old bungalow that we didn't really have any money to fix up, and just getting really bored with the decor and wanting to make it better and nice and change things out, not having money to buy stuff. So just being able to, having to look at the bits of furniture we already had and thinking, if I put that old shelf on top of that cabinet, it kind of looks like a hutch dresser, and then I could paint the whole lot and it turns it into something else. Or if I move this piece of furniture from this room to that room and put it on wheels or whatever, take the doors off and put it on the wall, then it becomes a wall cabinet. Like basically just starting with what I had and seeing what I could do with what I had. Plus a few trips to op shops and secondhand stores to supplement things. And then once you've trained your eye, like I think it's a really good discipline, or really good exercise, to look at a piece of furniture, like a chair, look at a chair and think, what would it look like if it was painted white? Or if it was painted black? Or if it was painted bright yellow? How would it look? What sort of style would it look like? And how would it fit with the rest of my decor? Would I like it better or worse? And you can look at your furniture, which might be like a mishmash of stuff that you've picked up from here, there, and everywhere, and think, okay, I'm gonna make this look coordinated, like the bedroom furniture. I'm gonna make my bed and my dressing table look like they belong to each other because I'm gonna paint them both black. And then you've got kind of the beginning of a design style, and you can accent it with something once you've eliminated the distractions of having mismatched stuff. So the more you develop that way of thinking and develop your eye, and the more that you just experiment with things, the more you see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can attest to that. I always try to make time to go to the op shop these days, or whenever I can. It's always been a big favorite hobby of mine.
I have a rule now, though, something in, something out. So if I go to the op shop, I have to take a whole lot of stuff back as well, because there's only so much stuff you can fit in one house.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got a question in the chat from Caroline asking about your experience in Papua New Guinea and whether or not you encountered any sort of upcycling or repurposing of materials there on your trip.
That's a good question. I wasn't. Well, one thing that I did see, which was really inspiring, was a project that some women are working on. Who, it's kind of upcycling. They get donated bolts of fabric that are not wanted, and they have a little sewing room, and they are sewing them to make reusable pads, for which they then take to schools and give to girls. Because one of the big problems in PNG is that there's a lot of stigma around periods. It's taboo, and traditionally when you had your period, you had to go right away from everyone, from your family, and various villages do it differently, but basically it's not a good time. And girls miss out on school, and then they fall behind, and then they're at risk of dropping out of school, which is really bad because that puts them on a trajectory to all sorts of nasty things. But by having these reusable pads, they can stay in school, and they can stay clean, and especially if that school with the Through the Wash program gets a tap and a tank so they can wash their hands. They've got sanitary, safe toilets. Yeah, so I guess that's an example of taking something unwanted and turning it into items that are very simple, but actually have the capacity to transform girls' lives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's so easy to take all that stuff for granted. and think about it being kind of trivial, but like that, and as an example, is literally changing people's lives through not seeing something as a waste resource, but instead using it to help people, which is super cool. Yeah. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, we're open to discussion as well. I've got plenty of questions to ask, so we'll be kind of keeping the discussion rolling. But if you would like to post a question in the chat, feel free to do so, and I'll try to read it out. Or if you're feeling bold, you can unmute yourself and ask a question as well, to do with anything that we're talking about. So, yeah.
And can I just say, while people are thinking of questions, thanks for all those lovely comments. They're really, really encouraging.
Sweet. So one thing that we were kind of, that I do wonder about sometimes as well, do you think that there is a culture of repurposing stuff that is growing? Do you see it as something that is growing or becoming more commonplace, or do you think it's sort of like we're fighting against the incoming tide of consumerism and things that are making it incredibly difficult to really like empower people to want to upcycle or repurpose old things?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a growing trend. When I wrote my first book, Upcycling, it was like a term that barely anybody knew what it meant. It was kind of a new concept, well, a new name for what our grandmothers did, which was that sort of make, do, and mend kind of culture. But upcycling is sort of adds an extra element to it because it's the creative freedom to change something into something completely different. But yeah, I definitely think it's growing in popularity because people are realizing that we just can't carry on the way we are, that it's just dumb to be cutting down trees and putting them in landfill, or to be buying things that look nice for 5 minutes and then fall apart and we can't fix them and then throw them away and get more things. You might do that once and then, or twice, and then you think, hang on a minute, I can't actually do this over the course of my life. I can't live with the burden of all that rubbish, all that trash that I've created. And I think that's a growing awareness that people are having. And also perhaps in this new time with grappling with this global pandemic, people losing their jobs, there's a lot of economic uncertainty. A lot of the ways of working, ways of doing things during the Depression, when people just did not have the money to buy new stuff, they just had to fix up what they had, and they had to get creative with the things around them, and they had to, like, you know, instead of throwing clothes away or giving them away, cutting them up and using them to make something else. So I think that that will really encourage people to upcycle as well, because just sheer economic necessity or boredom with what that they have around them. I see there's another question in the chat. How do you feel about supporting big corporations that are attempting to work in a more sustainable way, better to avoid big consumerist culture completely and try to be self-sufficient? Or is it worthwhile to show support for companies trying to do the right thing? I totally think it's good to show support to companies, for companies to do the right thing. When I was editing Good magazine, that was all about sustainable living. And it was all about showcasing companies that were ethical, that had sustainably sourced products, that, yeah. And I think a really simple, we have to make so many complicated consumer choices all the time, and it can get a bit overwhelming. But I think, you know, if you just have a really simple filter, like, is this company or is this product trying to be part of the solution, or does it feel like it's part of the problem? Then that can help you kind of jump one way or the other.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I'm not sure if I've really like I think there's a lot of grey area with it. It's not as simple yes and no answer. In that, like, you know, a lot of the problems that we're facing come from behaviors of business, you know, and like inherent structures of the ways that business and society are intertwined, and businesses or sort of corporations and individuals are the relationship there. And so, like, to, you know, to try and say that using that very same system to try and make the positive change that the same system is causing could be, you know, it's sort of like neither here nor there whether or not that's like, I'm not quite sure exactly where that tangent's going, but kind of like whether or not it's going to actually have the effect that we want it to, or whether or not we're going to kind of reach a ceiling where business is going to be as effective as it can be within the existing paradigm, so to speak. And at what point do you need to kind of like transition into an entirely new model of consumption or something? It's
it's an interesting question. I'm not an expert in economics, but I suspect that it's not trade that's the problem, it's the way that trade is done. Because I've seen plenty of examples of fair trade working really, really well. And, you know, like fair trade chocolate and coffee are a really good example of that. You know, we all want coffee to drink. I'm a total coffee addict. You can choose to drink only fair trade coffee, or you can choose to only eat fair trade bananas. Oh, actually, that doesn't apply in Australia because they're all locally grown, aren't they? In New Zealand, it's a choice between awful, child-killing, polluting, unethically produced bananas or ethical bananas. There's certain brands, and like you can choose to just buy those and not the other ones. And that way, you're not supporting the wrong way of doing business. You're supporting the right way of doing business. Because people still need to make a living. I'll never forget once meeting a man from a fair coffee collective from oh gosh, I can't remember what country it was, somewhere a long way away. Anyway, he said to me, he looked me in the eye and he said, whenever anybody buys a coffee, a fair trade coffee, there's a long line of people standing behind that coffee who want to say thank you to you for making that choice. Because it's thanks to that choice that, you know, someone down the line can buy shoes for their children or pay for a doctor when their baby gets sick. And you know, that's very true.
Or it's as perhaps as good as we can do in this time, and perhaps there will be a better solution in the future. But if you're going to drink coffee, are you going to buy the stuff that you believe to be, and you hope and you trust to be ethically sourced, or are you going to buy the stuff that you know is probably not going to be ethically sourced?
And what we need to make good choices is really good quality information. And that's just to do another little plug for Oxfam. Oxfam Australia have done some amazing work in that area of, they put out a report last year called What She Makes, which was really depressing, really sort of cold hard look at the textile industry and the clothes that are made by some of the really big brands, which are available in New Zealand as well, but some of the high street brands that are just the awfully sad, exploitative situations that the women who sew those clothes live in, where they barely get paid enough to eat, let alone see their children who might be a day away or two away, you know, with their heartbreaking stories. So it's like the companies that are producing things and then basing your consumer behavior on that good quality information.
Yeah, it's kind of, it relates a little bit back to food as well, that idea of transparency. And I guess that's one of the huge things of what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to empower everyone to do in this cohort is, by growing your own food, it's like bringing transparency back into that process of, we still need to look at, if we're growing using things like aquaponics and sourcing seeds and things, we need to sort of know where those are coming from. But when we're growing stuff ourselves, it's like we know where that food was grown. It's like we grew it, and that supply chain is totally transparent, which is awesome. Got a couple of questions in the chat. So one from G. What are your thoughts on packaging that gets reused, washed, and turned over again and again? As opposed to the packaging not existing in the first place. Would you like to see more initiatives like this? So repurposing packaging.
Well, yeah, if it can be made to work, I think that's brilliant. A lot of low-grade plastics. The council in Wellington have now decided they're not going to accept them for recycling. They're going to just put them in landfill. So I think that consumers need to vote with their feet, with their wallet, but producers also need to take notice of that and make sure that what they're using in the way of packaging can be recycled or repurposed. Because somehow we need to eliminate those low-grade plastics that can't be recycled or can't be repurposed. We need to get them out of the food supply system, because it is incredibly frustrating going shopping and ending up with a trolley full of plastic, because it's like you don't go shopping for plastic, you go shopping for food. And we need to find better ways to do that. More initiatives around that. Brilliant idea.
We had a guest on last week. Some of you were probably there. We heard from Reground and Luke, their operations manager, and talking about obviously they deal with composting coffee grounds and soft plastics recycling, and an initiative that has kind of sprung out of the startup scene in Melbourne, which is super cool. But he talked a lot about the waste hierarchy and how obviously the number one, like dealing with waste is a series of, there's like a pyramid or a hierarchy of how you should deal with things, and the number one thing is avoidance. So it seems pretty obvious, but like the easiest way to address waste crises and recycling issues is just to avoid the stuff in the beginning, and then repurposing stuff is actually quite low down hierarchy, because it's like trying to deal with it when it becomes a problem. It can be really frustrating going to. Another reason why it's really good to grow at home and get started doing that. Even if you can't if you can't grow all your food at home, you can grow a significant, a proportion of it. There's no soft plastics recycling there, which is really cool. I've got a question from Ange. Sarah, what do you think of Nestle's move away from fair trade? Is this a trend from the big companies, and what is their rationale?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I'm sorry, I'm not over that particular development. But I just know that Nestle have been responsible for some extremely bad behaviour in the past, and I'd be very suspicious of them. And there's quite a lot of, I think in the fair trade sector, you get a lot of sort of the halo effect, when you have a company that will have one fair trade product and they get lots of kudos for that, and then they fail to mention that a lot of the bulk of their rest of their range is not fair trade. They sort of trade off that goodwill that they earn through the one hero product. And other people criticize the fair trade system because they say it's inflexible and it locks farmers into prices that, the prices were left on the open market, they potentially get more, because there are sometimes, I think, because the prices have to be set, if the prices of commodities go up, then potentially they could be paid less than they might. But I don't know enough about it to speak authoritatively on the subject. I just think that there's no substitute for having third-party independent watchdogs and auditors, and that's where things that are like certified fair trade they deserve our support. And if companies step away from fair trade products, then consumers need to be asking them what's going on and why.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's another one that's kind of similar kind of certification called B Corp. G's just mentioned it in the chat, and it's a sort of it's a certification for good business, for businesses that have social outcomes tied into their sort of DNA as a business, and it's quite a it's not like an easy certification to get, and you kind of have to do a lot to maintain it. But it's sort of becoming it allows for individuals to know if they see that certification on a company that they give a crap about, or at least someone in the organization gives a crap about trying to address some issues. But it's also sort of a community for businesses as well, who can perhaps work together, knowing that they have the certification. And I guess you're kind of right. It's like we trust a lot. Like, we live in an information age. It's really hard to know, the truth, and we need to sort of trust, allow the third-party organizations with the good intention to make sure that people's living qualities are upheld, to sort of do that research for us and provide that transparency for us. And it's kind of interesting. I wonder how much how much trust we can place in those organizations. But I feel like it's kind of like, if that's something that we want, what else? What other choice do we have? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good place to start. Like,
yeah.
There's Forest and Bird in New Zealand did a fishing guide of like what are the best and worst fish to eat. We came to the conclusion in the end that it was all too complicated and we weren't going to eat fish at all. But back in the day when we did eat fish, we'd make sure that they were at the top end and not the bottom end. There are ethical clothing guides that come out annually, and they're really hard to do, and there's a lot of work that goes into them. And I think that that just makes you so much in such a better place to make informed decisions, and to then start putting pressure on the companies that are doing badly.
Absolutely. All right, we're getting pretty close to 8 o'clock. Time really flies when you're having fun. Of course, if anyone has any burning questions for Sarah, now's definitely a chance to ask them. But also, if you've got any questions for the Farmall team regarding your systems at home as well, GE or Abia or I can help you answer those. Does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to know about? Oh, come on.
If you want to buy my book, you can jump online and get it I'll knock the price down.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a bit about the books, Mum?
Oh, there's 2 of them. One of them's $15, one's $20. But I could do a special deal. If you mention that you're from this Farmall group chat. They're full of step-by-step projects. So, because I think that what's really helpful is just to kind of that really practical guide of like, this is what it looked like before, these are the materials I used, I did this, I did this, I did this, and then this is what it looked like at the end. And there's lots and lots of projects done over a number of years. So lots of home things and garden things. So yeah.
I really liked your number 1 tip for upcycling, which is paint. Just paint it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an impatient upcycler, and I'm time poor, and I want instant results. And so painting things makes a massive difference really quickly. And you can get really good quality paints, low VOC paints that are water-based. You can get water-based enamels, so you don't have to use lots of nasty solvents. And you can make a mess.
Awesome.
All
right. Cool. Well, I think we might wrap it up now. Thanks everyone for coming tonight and listening to Sarah speak. Thanks, Sarah, for speaking. Really good to hear. Our first international guest, number 1 first international guest. You'll have that one forever, which is sick. For anyone who's watching this in the recorded version, hello. And yeah, tune in on Saturday. We're going to be doing covering another sustainable development goal with the kids, and perhaps looking at some upcycling projects for them to do. So feel free to join in. That should be lots of fun. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I guess that's Sarah. Would you like to say anything before we go?
Oh, just thanks for having me and for listening, and for all the lovely comments I've been reading. They're really encouraging and great to hear. Thank you.
Awesome. Alrighty. See you later, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.